Geocentrism. Bowden replies to CoolHardLogic.
Oh great, a rebuttal video. I love these things. One person makes a video outlining their arguments, then another person goes through them systematically and produces their evidence to counter them, and the process goes on, and we all get to learn some amazing things as two titans of knowledge go at it with each other. Okay, nerdfest, I know, but I really love it. Here we're going to get to watch Malcolm Bowden, a geocentrist, produce a systematic debunking of the arguments against geocentrism put forward by CoolHardLogic in their series Testing Geocentrism. Let's have a look at the description. Bowden criticises the first 2 minutes of CoolHardLogic's first anti-geocentric YTube video and shows its gross errors. Well, that sounds promising, doesn't it? Let's have a look.
Under the name of CoolHardLogic, a critic of geocentrism has made about 8 YouTube videos on the subject. Having looked at his number 1 video some time ago, I felt that his criticisms were so foolish that they were not worth replying to. However, I thought I would make a short video replying to just the opening sections to show those who eagerly watch his videos and cheer him onwards just how very foolish his criticisms are. Scholarly impaired, he says. Then how does he explain the fact that there are many highly qualified scientists holding senior positions who are also geocentrists? He then starts to criticize the work of a geocentrist called Fernie Boy. But before he does so, he takes a side swipe at the Bible, criticizing some of the passage which he thinks are ridiculous.
Okay. Malcolm spends about 7 minutes here, yes, almost half of his video, taking umbrage with CoolHardLogic having a pop at some of the stranger things advocated in the Bible, and calling geocentrists scholastically impaired, which he counters by attempting to produce a modern version of the De Viris Illustribus with some weird appeal to authority. Big tip, Malcolm, I only care about the science, not the scientists. Now, I don't want to spend too long on this. Most of Malcolm's arguments are highly dubious here, but we're interested in the astrophysics, Malcolm, not your interpretation of the Bible. A simple I disagree with CoolHardLogic about the Bible stuff would have sufficed, but then perhaps you needed to pad the video out a bit for reasons which I think will become very clear. Finally, about 7 minutes in, we come to something to do with astrophysics. This should be exciting.
Now, I have received several suggested proofs of geocentricity, but they are all simply wrong.
Hold on! Did Malcolm just say he's received several proofs of geocentricity, but they are all simply wrong? Has Malcolm just admitted that geocentrism is wrong?
Now, I have received several suggested proofs of geocentricity, but they are all simply wrong.
Yep, he definitely just said that. Alas, I feel this may just be a slip of the tongue. A gigantic slip of the tongue. I'm just going to point the viewer very subtly to the 2 links from the website Changing Minds in the description with reference to speech errors. Anyway, on with the video.
In this case, Polaris is stationary in both the geocentric and the heliocentric models.
I'm afraid I must disabuse you of such a monumentally wrong belief, which, if you're as well versed as you claim to be, I can only put down to being the utterance of someone with the most perfidious nature. You fail to mention, Malcolm, that Polaris isn't stationary in the non-geocentric model. For some reason, you completely fail to mention the precession of the equinoxes, a phenomenon that has been measured that shows that as the pole precesses during the Earth's rotation, Polaris changes its position in the night sky over a cycle that is known to take around 26,000 years. Polaris's shifting position has been observed, and it's even mentioned in the very video you were replying to, so I don't know how this could have escaped your attention.
But notice what CoolHardLogic has done. His very first detailed criticism of a geocentric video is of a case that no knowledgeable geocentrist would use. CoolHardLogic has deliberately chosen a wrong example so that he can demonstrate to all his eager followers just how clever he is. He has chosen a straw man and then proceeds to demolish it.
Now Malcolm attempts to castigate CoolHardLogic for taking on FernieBoy 100 on the sole premise that FernieBoy 100's claims are not ones he feels any serious geocentrist would use. The problem is that this doesn't really make CoolHardLogic's arguments strawman attacks. FernieBoy 100 has presented these arguments and has a large enough viewership, so CoolHardLogic is pointing out the flaw in their argument. Just because it's not the same argument as yours, Malcolm, doesn't make it a strawman when CHL is openly debunking someone else's actual argument. It's not a wrong example of a geocentrist argument just because it's one that you and others don't share. It's still patently an example of a geocentrist argument, Malcolm. I seriously don't understand how you don't understand this. In fact, if you watch more of the series, you'll probably see that CoolHardLogic goes through many arguments made by many geocentrists, some of whom you may agree with and some of whom you may not, and systematically refutes them. That's not creating a straw man. It's systematically going through the many arguments that the many different types of geocentrists present, Malcolm. In fact, your claim that he's committing a strawman fallacy because of this is, ironically, a strawman fallacy in itself.
Now, I have no intention of wasting my time criticizing the rest of the first video.
Hold on, back up a second. You have no intention of going through the rest of the video. What? You spend 7 minutes going on about things that are completely irrelevant to astrophysics, then you spend around a minute and a half picking out one thing that CoolHardLogic has brought up, and you think this constitutes a reply? Malcolm, here's a little tip. If you want to produce a video that rebuts someone's arguments, you kind of have to, well, I don't know how much better I can put this, rebut their arguments.
And most certainly, I will not even look at any of the other videos he has made.
You won't even look at any other videos he's made? Okay, so after taking issue with the fact that he has debunked the claims of a prolific YouTube geocentrist in one of his videos, whose arguments you disagree with, but evidently from the amount of likes FernieBoy's work got, several others seem to agree with, making CHL's response valid for their argument, which was the point, you then decide, frankly astoundingly, that you don't have to go on to look at any other evidence he presented before you can magically proclaim it all rubbish. Again, Malcolm, if you want to debunk something, you have to debunk it. That means going through the arguments they put forward and systematically debunking them, and not just stopping at the first instance where they make an argument against someone else's actual argument, which is very different from a strawman argument, and just assuming from this that they have nothing to say about your arguments. As someone who has watched CHL's series and your own videos, I can assure you that he does address your arguments in his series, and you would do well to actually watch them and come up with rebuttals of them if you can. I suspect that the reason is very clear as to why you don't want to do this. Because you can't. If you want to prove me wrong, then be my guest and go through them. Making an argument, especially one as fraught with holes as the one you just made, against 2 minutes of a video, does not in any way magically accumulate to a successful debunking of that entire video, let alone an entire series. I'm frankly incredulous at the fact that you appear to believe it does, given your assertions towards your own intellectual credibility. I can assure you that this series is full of mathematics and physics that anyone with a serious interest in science would go through and rebut if they felt it was wrong. The fact that you won't, I think it's clear for all to see, speaks volumes about you. You then go on to use the rest of your video simply to tout your other videos without even bothering to tie them into a response to CoolHardLogic, which is, oddly, the title of your video. The frankly simplistic assertions you make in your explanation of the seasons video are addressed in CoolHardLogic's second video. Perhaps you could have gone through it and shown us why you disagree with him. Or if you think his video doesn't constitute a valid response to your video, maybe you could go through it and explain in detail why. You then play your now repetitive game of trying to rewrite history by rewriting the conclusions of famous experiments. You begin, as ever, by inventing a conspiracy and stating that these experiments are never taught. Malcolm, I can only conclude that you've either never attended an astrophysics degree, or even a physics degree, at any credible university, or even any university, because I can assure you that students are fully aware of these experiments. You continue to take each experiment in turn and try and explain it away from a geocentrist viewpoint, an interesting tactic. However, by doing so, you fail to explain that all these experiments, taken together, ruled out the ether drag and ether wind hypotheses. With the Michelson-Morley experiment, you fail to address the fact that recent resonator experiments have confirmed the absence of any ether wind at the 10 to the minus 17th level. You also seem to be incapable of understanding how a statistically insignificant result is a null result, which I found astounding from someone who is trying to appear so well versed in science. With the Michelson-Gale experiment, you fail to point out that, whilst it can support a stationary ether, which, interestingly, isn't the kind of ether you're going for, it can only do this by contradicting the Michelson-Morley experiment. In other words, Malcolm, not only can you not have your cake and eat it, you don't get any cake at all. With regards to the Airy telescope experiment, that has been explained many times by many people. I'll let Andromedaswake make the point that you failed to mention in your reply video to them. You know, the bit that you conveniently cut out in your reply that went like this.
Wait a minute, hang on. The ether is moving? Is that what you think? You think that the ether is moving, so it exists and it is moving. But ether drag, or the stationary ether at the level of the experiment, is what's required to actually save the ether hypothesis, because remember, the speed of light is constant for all observers. If the ether was moving, this simply wouldn't be the case, Malcolm. So which is it? Does the ether rotate freely about the Earth in contradiction to experiment? Or does the ether drag in contradiction to experiment? I think you'll find that the third option, the ether does not exist, is actually the correct answer.
And that's your video. That's your reply to CoolHardLogic. 7 minutes of irrelevant twaddle, 1.5 minutes of not actually addressing his points, and around 6 minutes touting a video that is rebutted by CoolHardLogic in a video that you refuse to look at, and proselytizing about your rewriting of scientific history. I don't know what universe you live in, Malcolm, but that's not a rebuttal video by any stretch of the imagination. To respectfully paraphrase No More, I don't know if there's an actual name for this kind of fallacy, but I'd call it the saying you're going to do something, completely failing to do it, and somehow claiming you've achieved your stated goal whilst looking like a child fallacy. You haven't actually rebutted a single argument made by CoolHardLogic in his one video, let alone his entire series, and in fact you've left my video fairly short of content to deal with. So instead, we're going to look at some more claims you've made elsewhere. To begin with, let's look at that Barber and Bertotti paper, shall we? You know, the one you like to tout around as some kind of proof for geocentrism, in the transparent hope that it's obscure enough for people not to know about it, allowing you to invent some bizarre conspiracy theory around it, and that people will simply be bamboozled by it and won't understand what they're looking at and will accept whatever you say about it. Remember the one? You attempted to bamboozle me with it once. However, unfortunately for you, I'm already familiar with this paper, and it's easy to see that this paper doesn't say anything that you claim it does. It's not written by geocentrists, it doesn't support a geocentric universe, and it is easy to obtain a copy of this paper on the internet. In fact, in your own video about it, you read out the reference given on Barber's own website for it, remember?
Gravity and Inertia in a Marchian Framework by J.B. Barber and B. Bertotti. Il Nuovo Cimento, 32b, brackets 1, pages 1 to 27, on the 11th of March, 1977.
Now going to the site of Nuovo Cimento B, you're informed that the archives for this period are held by Springer, and given a link to get to the correct page. JimSmithInChiapas even showed you where you can get hold of this from Springer. Malcolm, Do you not know how to read references? In case anyone thinks I'm being unfair or patronising with this question, here's a comment by Malcolm asking how many pages the article has. Yes, the article that he read out the reference for, stating,
pages 1 to 27.
As for your claims that this paper is somehow being blocked for some reason, well, here it is on the reading list for a quantum gravity course at the Perimeter Institute, and here it is on the reading list of the School of Physics and Astronomy at the University of Minnesota. Even Harvard and NASA linked to the Springer link mentioned above. The upshot is that not only is it available to the public, it's also being read and taught in public institutions. So where has this bizarre idea of it being blocked by a massive heliocentric conspiracy come from, Malcolm? None of Barber's papers or works are being hidden away or blocked by anyone. He's being happily funded by the Foundational Questions Institute, an organisation that provides grants to, quote, catalyse, support and disseminate research on questions at the foundations of physics and cosmology, an institute that has Alan Guth on its scientific advisory board. Totti is also not a geocentrist. He was one of the main contributors to general relativity, and one of its testers confirming its veracity. Their paper does not, as you claim, mathematically examine a stationary solid body brackets the Earth, surrounded by a dense solid rotating sphere brackets the stars. I can only imagine you've got this from a misreading of sections 5 cosmology and 8 finite bodies and frame dragging. Or maybe you're misreading section 4 few body problems and their quotation of Berkeley's criticisms of Newton. But this isn't an invocation of a heaven of fixed stars for them to use in their calculations. It's an analogy to highlight the problem of determining motion without a reference frame, and it has nothing to do with the shell mentioned later. That should be obvious because they don't mention a fixed shell of stars. You've confused their analogy into their later sections. It does not propose that the pendulum effect or the equatorial bulge are not caused by the rotation of the Earth but instead by the spinning stars. And again, I'm not sure where you get this idea from. Also, they never attacked Einstein's integrity in the paper as you claimed, nor do they think that general relativity has corrupted science. I'm seriously having to question where your editorial comes from here. You're trying to make it sound like they are accusing Einstein of flaking it or cooking results, and in the process quote mining them in the most ridiculous way. Let's have a look at the actual quote, shall we? According to our point of view, the fundamental constants C and G, velocity of light and gravitational constant, have a proto-physical origin. By putting them as fundamental constants into his local physics, Einstein may have unwittingly smuggled into general relativity integrated properties of the universe, which then, of course, show up in planetary dynamics. Very different to what you suggest. In fact, it flatly contradicts your assertion that Einstein's method did not work for the other planets. They're actually saying that it does. And can you prove to us that you understand this quote by explaining what proto-physical means? What they are saying here is that general relativity is confirmed by planetary dynamics, and not that they are accusing him of being deceitful, as you claim. They're just suggesting that there may be problems with this extrapolation. This is made clear in the same paragraph as they state above it that, quote, it is perhaps understandable that general relativity is able to predict other local phenomena with great accuracy, but that it may be possible it will fail when applied to more extreme conditions, in which the proto-physics could lead to a qualitatively different physics not deducible from our comparatively tranquil local conditions. Now, it's an interesting paper which has its criticisms, and which even they stated is a theory in its infancy. It also predicts effects yet to be seen, such as an extra contribution to the perihelion shift independent of the semi-major axis that they concede is too big by 16 orders of magnitude according to the Hughes-Draver experiment. But then, this is a criticism of their paper, and not a criticism of their geocentric model, largely because it is not a geocentric model. It's also a fairly massive criticism that they acknowledge themselves, which means even if it did attempt to prove geocentrism, it would be far from anything remotely useful. But at no point does it attempt to prove geocentrism, attack heliocentrism, postulate a fixed shell of stars, or any other claims you've put to it. And if you believe it does, and believe that its formulas somehow show how the motions of the planets orbit a stationary Earth, then could you please use those equations, as you seem to believe you're an expert on this paper, to formulate a prediction for us to test? And I won't accept "it'll just be the same anyway" as an answer. I want to see your workings. I want to see how you use those equations, starting from a geocentric universe, to make a prediction about a future celestial event. Now, I have to be honest with you, I've bent over backwards to find Barber or Bertotti anywhere advocating geocentrism, or saying that this paper supports geocentrism, and I just can't find it. All I can find is lots of Christian blogs assigning meaning to their paper and asserting they've produced a geocentric framework, even as yourself asserting that they assert this, which makes it really odd that I can't find them asserting this anywhere. What are your sources here? In fact, shortly after I sent Barber an email in early April asking him about his involvement in the film The Principle and this paper itself, he came out and gave a public statement about the fact that he is not a geocentrist. Which is all a bit weird, because if this paper, which isn't being hidden or redacted by him or anyone else, really did prove a possible geocentric universe, he'd be yelling about it. There's no reason to be quiet. It's already written, it's already out there and publicly available, and everyone in the cosmological world has read it. He'd be yelling it from the rooftops. So Malcolm, how about asking the authors themselves before trying to assign meaning to their papers? Barber's email is on his website. How come you never thought of asking him about this paper before you touted it around the place, or even at any point after I challenged you about it? Apparently, what the authors think about the paper they themselves wrote means absolutely nothing to you, Malcolm, which, again, speaks volumes. In fact, let's see what he had to say to the online magazine Live Science. British journalist Julian Barber, cited in a trailer description of the documentary on YouTube, said his involvement in the film seems to have arisen from a gross misunderstanding of a 1977 paper he authored with Italian physicist Bruno Bertotti. The paper, Barber told Live Science, created a model showing that Newton's first law, that objects in motion will continue to move in a straight line unless an external force is applied, can be explained by distant stars or masses in the universe. The physicists used a simple model in which the Sun is at the centre of the universe, but the model was not supposed to fully represent reality. It also, Barber pointed out, is not a geocentric model, as the Earth is still going around the Sun. Now, I just want to take a second here to point out that I successfully predicted this would happen in my very first dealing with you regarding Julian Barber in this paper. Now, since I pointed out repeatedly your error in asserting that it wasn't available to the public or was being blocked, and JimSmithInChiapas made a video showing you and the rest of the world that your assertion was incorrect, you have changed your webpage to acknowledge that you could get it from Springer, but somehow have failed to acknowledge that it isn't blocked. The only thing I can think is that you think the fact that you have to pay for it means it's blocked. If that's how you wish to redefine the word blocked, Malcolm, then pretty much every scientific paper published in a peer-reviewed journal is blocked. Books I have to pay for are blocked. Even the food I have to buy to eat is blocked, Malcolm. Even your books are blocked. And unless you want to advocate an anarchist utopia, I think it's obvious that your attempt to define a paper that is available to the public as being blocked, based solely on the fact that you have to pay for it, is nothing short of infantile, and at worst a deliberate act of mendacity to invent a conspiracy that doesn't exist. After all this, you've claimed that I've lied about you claiming that the Barber and Bertotti paper failed the peer review process. To steal King Crocoduck's catchphrase, unfortunately for you, however, you actually did claim this, and the reason you find yourself having to backtrack so defensively is because it was pointed out to you that both Nuovo Cemento and Springer are peer-reviewed journals, which would make your claim rather ridiculous. But let's see what you said, and if I lied, shall we? Quote, Barber now wants to disassociate himself from it because he realises that it would badly damage his prospects in the scientific world. That is the power of the peer review system that eliminates any promotion of papers that contradict established scientific papers. And again, quote, several years ago, an open letter in the New Scientist from some 30-plus scientists with international reputations complained bitterly that papers critical of the Big Bang Theory were rarely accepted by the orthodox journals. What fate, therefore, awaits papers that support creation and geocentrism? This is precisely what happened to Barber's paper. You clearly claim that, quote, this is precisely what happened to Barber's paper. You clearly claim here that the Barber and Bertotti paper was not accepted by the orthodox journals through the peer review process. But Springer and Nuovo Cemento B are orthodox peer-reviewed scientific journals, so what is it doing in them, Malcolm, if it failed the peer review process? You still can't stop lying, can you, Malcolm? So let's review, shall we? You've invented a conspiracy that doesn't exist around this paper. You've asserted it says things that it doesn't. You've never tried to contact the authors of the paper. You've quote-mined the authors of the paper, suggesting they've said something they haven't. You've lied about its history regarding peer review, and then tried to pretend that you didn't. You failed to follow a reference that you yourself read out, which would lead you to this paper. And you failed to acknowledge at any point that you have been wrong regarding this paper in any way, or substantiate any of your claims surrounding it. And on top of all this, when I suggested you could ask Barber why his paper wasn't available for free on his website, but instead only available for you to buy via Springer, you said that I was, quote, making excuses for him, and that, quote, if a creationist were to do this, you would really criticise him for such an evasive tactic. Now hang on, Malcolm. Are you incredulous that I'm not criticising someone who you believe wrote a geocentrist paper for doing something that you believe I should criticise someone for if they'd written a geocentrist paper? I think you're muddling up your argument, Malcolm. Are you arguing that he is a geocentrist who wrote a geocentrist paper and you want me to criticise him? Or are you saying this isn't a geocentrist paper and you want me to criticise him? Which would make no sense because that would have just completely undermined your entire argument around this paper. Which is it, Malcolm? Seriously, I really don't know what point you're trying to make here. You confused your argument, Malcolm, and now I'm confused. Neither option makes any sense. Do you want me to criticise a geocentrist for being supposedly underhanded, even though this isn't anywhere near being underhanded? Or is this not a geocentrist paper? You've completely undermined yourself with this. I'm actually speechless at this point. Even you don't seem to know what's going on, and it's your argument, Malcolm. For another case of you lying, let's take a quick look at that letter you believed 30-plus scientists wrote complaining bitterly that papers critical of the Big Bang Theory were rarely accepted by the orthodox journals. I've got a copy here. Funnily enough, there's nothing about peer review until the very bottom. And whilst they talk about the peer review process on funding bodies for research, nowhere in this letter do they complain that anyone's papers are being wrongly rejected by the peer review process in orthodox peer-reviewed scientific journals. Let's read it together, shall we, Malcolm? Quote, today, virtually all financial and experimental resources in cosmology are devoted to Big Bang studies. Funding comes from only a few sources, and all the peer review committees that control them are dominated by supporters of the Big Bang. In other words, the signatories are complaining about there not being enough of what is already a limited budget given to alternative theories. Research funding bodies are not scientific journals, Malcolm. Someone who supposedly understands anything about science should understand that. These are two different types of body and two different types of process. Nobody has said anywhere in this letter that the orthodox journals aren't accepting any papers or that the peer review process is rejecting them, based on them being critical of the Big Bang Theory. You're lying through your teeth again, Malcolm. Now, a quick look through the signatories also shows that they are interested in theories such as the non-standard plasma cosmology, and there's not a single geocentrist among them. I want to quickly take the opportunity here to point out something that you've asserted before, that the word Machian is code word for geocentric. This appears to only be something that geocentric bloggers themselves believe and is not what people in the astrophysics and cosmological communities actually use it to mean. Your assertion seems to come from a childish equivocation with a term used in Mach's principle. The broad notion is that mass there influences inertia here, but the key word here is influences, which you try and every other geocentrist tries to falsely equivocate with causes, as in being the sole cause of. Unfortunately, it just means influences, as in also causes. That's why the word influences is used and not the word causes. As the Wikipedia article goes on to say, a very general statement of Mach's principle is local physical laws are determined by the large-scale structure of the universe. What geocentrists conveniently fail to realise is that the Earth is part of the large-scale structure of the universe, and geocentrism, using this principle, could only make sense if that wasn't true. Unfortunately, due to the Earth being in the universe, and with the gravity of the Earth having such an obvious and measurable effect, you can't just pretend it's not. Your inability to understand the not too subtle nuances of your mother tongue in this respect is astonishing to the point of making me incredulous. Even Einstein recognised Mach's principle, and relativity is heavily influenced by it. And if Machian really was a code word for a geocentric approach, then why does Barber and Bertotti's paper, which you tout around so proudly, have the Earth going around the Sun, Malcolm? Now, let's go back to your webpage. I notice you've added a new paper by Luca Popov. In the interest of brevity, I'm going to recommend people read Alec McAndrew's appraisals in the links given below. Some of my favourite criticisms of his include, quote, "The vector potential is just invented out of thin air and is given the appropriate value to get the right result." Now that's what I call smuggling something in, Malcolm. And another quote of his, "It is peculiar that in a paper which attempts to show the dynamic equivalence of the Earth orbiting the Sun and the Sun orbiting the Earth, the author reduces the problem to a form that is capable of calculating only relative orbits from the outset." Yes, relativity is so flawed it has to be smuggled into what you believe to be geocentric papers. Something I want to draw everyone's attention to is that Malcolm has tried to use this paper to shore up his rather juvenile appraisal of the Barber and Bertotti paper by claiming that it, quote, "said exactly the same things as found in Barber and Bertotti's article." But there's a bit of a big problem here, Malcolm. Your appraisal of the Barber and Bertotti paper has been shown to be highly flawed, to say the least, and you've been incapable and unwilling to provide a detailed appraisal of the Barber and Bertotti paper, even after you've been asked for it on several occasions, that demonstrates the veracity of your claims surrounding its content. So you can't go around saying that this paper says the same thing when you fail to demonstrate that you even understand what the Barber and Bertotti paper said in the first place. Along with this, Popov's paper doesn't even mention the Barber and Bertotti paper, does it, Malcolm? The only thing he does cite is Barber's 1974 paper in Nature, Relative Distance Machian Theories, which is odd if the Barber and Bertotti paper is the seemingly seminal geocentrist paper that you appear to make it out to be by touting it around the place like an excited child. Your biggest problem with using this paper, though, is the same problem you always have. You present a paper about which you make bold statements, you highlight in red key phrases that you want people to focus on, and then conveniently forget to give a description or analysis of the mathematics, what the terms mean, how they fit together, and what result they give for the layperson to understand. These papers aren't written for the average layperson though, Malcolm, which is why you would have to go through them and translate the terms. Instead, you leave the maths there without any denotation at all, purely in the hope that someone without the ability to understand advanced physics will give up trying to understand it even at the first turn, and just accept everything it seems to say and everything you say about it. That's not presenting a paper that substantiates your claim, Malcolm. That's just hoping that nobody you show it to has the ability to understand the maths being presented and instead swallows everything you say whole. So why don't you deconstruct the mathematics in these papers and explain what the terms in them mean and how they fit together in a way that the average person can understand, Malcolm? Could it be because either you're incapable of doing so, or even worse, that would actually undermine what you are really trying to do, confuse people into accepting everything you say? If you want to show me that that's not what you're trying to do, all you have to do is deconstruct the maths, Malcolm. And this is the key difference between you and CoolHardLogic. As much as you may hate his style or colourful use of the vernacular, he deconstructs the mathematics and explains it and the science as he goes through it, whereas you, Malcolm, rely solely on people not being able to understand the maths in any paper you present, not bothering to explain it, and hoping they latch on to whatever you say rather than apply the critical thinking that you happily deny them through this approach. One treats their viewers with respect and guides them through the concepts they are presenting in an accessible manner. The other simply treats them with no respect at all and refuses to guide them through complex concepts, requiring them to simply take everything they say as read. Your inability to provide and explain the mathematics behind your chosen geocentric model in terms of its predictive power was exemplified by your response to a video by JimSmithInChiapas challenging anybody who thought they had a better model of celestial mechanics to predict the motions of the moons of Jupiter. You pithily argued that your predictions would be the same as the predictions made by conventional non-geocentric models. The problem with this is that you failed to provide any mathematics and physics to back up your claim, let alone to explain the mathematics involved. You see, I could claim that the germ theory of disease is wrong, and that all disease is caused by magical pixies blowing magical pixie dust into people's faces. When somebody asks me to use my model to predict contagion rates or susceptible demographics, I just pithily state, well, of course it's the same as the germ theory's predictions. But I haven't given any meaningful answer with that. I've not provided you with the mathematics to explain why my model should give the same results, even if it should, let alone provided a detailed analysis of them. Jim wasn't asking you to just state what you thought would happen. He was giving you an opportunity to demonstrate how your model works by demonstrating its predictive power, whether it agreed with the model we already have or not. But you failed to do this, Malcolm, and instead whined like a spoilt child. You had been given an opportunity, Malcolm, but you blew it. And you can wave all the scientific papers you want around the place, but we're asking you to demonstrate how the mathematics in those papers can be used to provide predictive power to your geocentrist model. Not just bold assertions, detailed analysis of your model and how it comes to the results it does and what those results are, and what predictions it can make so that we can test them. If you found it difficult, then you had ample time to contact the authors of those papers to get a helping hand, assuming those papers actually do say what you claim them to. But you didn't, Malcolm. A prime opportunity, and you threw it away. You can complain all you want about the motives of the person who set the challenge, but it doesn't diminish the fact that this was an opportunity for you to demonstrate how your geocentric-based mathematics could be applied to make a prediction about the motions of bodies in the night sky. The person's motives are meaningless. Had you the capacity to step up to that challenge, then nothing could have stopped you, not even someone's supposed nefarious motives. So, let's set a new challenge for the geocentrists out there. Just to be annoying, let's pick Mercury. As we all know, Leverrier was the first to recognise that the precession rate of Mercury's perihelion could not be accounted for by classical Newtonian mechanics back in 1859. It would take until 1915 before a mathematical model which could account for it would come to light, and you've guessed it, it was general relativity. So why not provide the mechanism and mathematics to explain this using geocentrism, and demonstrate that it works by taking us step by step through the process and not just waving a piece of paper with equations on it expecting us to be bamboozled into submission, to precisely predict the start, mid and end times of the next transit of Mercury in 2016, showing that your model also agrees with the transit times observed in 1924, the first transit observed after general relativity was introduced, and every transit before and since. What could possibly go wrong with your providing the mathematical models and a detailed explanation of how you use them to precisely describe and predict the motion of a body that baffled humanity up until just almost a century ago? And remember, no pithy statements about how it will be the same anyway. Just like your maths teachers used to annoyingly say at school, we want to see your workings. Otherwise your pithy statement remains pithy and meaningless. Of course, I'm going to make my own prediction about your replies, that you'll ignore the fact that this is an opportunity to present and demonstrate how your model works in detail, and instead hide behind those pithy statements about the predictions supposedly somehow being the same anyway. Though you refuse to demonstrate this as if just asserting it is a viable answer, quickest way to spot someone who doesn't know what they're talking about, whilst you try to wave papers in front of people's faces without going through the mathematics and explaining how it works and what result you come to, with even a perfunctory attempt at a detailed analysis of those papers. Something tells me from your past record, Malcolm, that I'm more likely to get my prediction correct than you are to even supply one. And if you do want to supply us with a prediction or a model we can test, just a quick word of advice. Don't use the Barber and Bertotti paper, because remember, their model has the Earth still going around the Sun. Now let's take a quick diversion and look at your video response to the wonderful video that everyone should watch, Creationists and the Speed of Light, tribute to CDK 007, the link to which I'll put in the description tab. Yes, Malcolm, the video you've just reopened to comments, in which, in the comments section, you state, quote, "I have only just found out that comments were disabled 6 years ago. I have now reinstated the allowance of comments." Right above the last comment by you from 6 years ago stating, quote, "I am closing the comments down." Do tell me, Malcolm, at what point did you have to point it out to yourself that you had disabled comments on your own video? Or are you so disconnected with your own actions that someone else had to point it out to you, even though you yourself stated that you were closing down the comments section? And isn't it also clear that you obviously didn't close the comments section down because the basic criticism is being deliberately fudged and avoided, as you claimed at the time, but because you were unable to answer the points being raised, and now hope that those dissenting voices have moved on? Next time you want to rewrite history, you might want to delete the comments as well, especially ones in which you state your intention to close down comments, if you want us to believe that it had escaped your attention that the comments section had been closed down. And you might also want to delete comments you obviously found difficult to counter, such as those that pointed out the use of cobalt 56 and cobalt 57 decay rates as a clock, the fact that the light isn't blue shifted enough for your conjecture to be true, and, as one commentator put it best, your logic doesn't work because both beams of light slow down together. After one light month in your demo, both the light reflected from the rings and the light coming from the supernova are travelling at the same speed and slowing down at the same rate. Your model assumes that one beam is travelling faster than the other because it's closer, which is wrong. They reach Earth with the same 8-month offset they start out with. Malcolm, if anybody was in any doubt about your mendacious approach, they need only look at the fact that you closed down comments on this video, clearly to stifle dissent, indeed by your own admission, and then reopened the comments section, trying to claim that you were unaware that comments had been disabled when you yourself disabled them. As I say, Malcolm, your own words indict you. To finish off, let's look at the amendment you made on your webpage. Yes, Malcolm, a collection of comments that pointed out that you were so completely wrong that you're off the map affected you so much you felt you had to amend your webpage. Not only that, but you felt you had to make it very clear to everyone how little it affected you. A sure sign of the very real effect it did have on you, Malcolm. People who aren't affected in such ways don't then go on to proclaim how unaffected they were in such a childish manner. Your lack of maturity makes your sensitivity to criticism sadly transparent, Malcolm. Now, as I predicted at the start of the video, I've no doubt you'll either ignore this video or, if you do reply to it, you will, at best, pick out what trivial things you think you can argue with, whilst missing and evading the more pertinent points, as this seems to be your one-trick pony, Malcolm. See your frankly pathetic attempt to reply to CoolHardLogic. But this doesn't matter. It just serves to prove how difficult you really do find intellectual discourse, Malcolm. Now, you may complain that I stated that the only words that can succinctly sum up Malcolm Bowden as evidenced by his own behaviour are liar, hypocrite, projectionist, paranoid delusionist, and petulant child. But Malcolm, that's exactly what your behaviour demands you to be called. Let's go through each accusation there, Malcolm. Liar. You've lied about a conspiracy surrounding the Barber and Bertotti paper and it being blocked, and you continue to do so. You have lied about there being a letter by 30+ scientists complaining that papers critical of the Big Bang Theory are being rejected by peer-reviewed journals. You have been, at best, economical with the truth with your readings of scientific papers and experiments. Hypocrite. You have accused the scientific community of censorship when you yourself have closed down debate that was critical of your theories. See again you disabling comments on your video. Projectionist. You claim that there is no evidence against geocentrism and have failed to provide any evidence for geocentrism. You claim that people are not wanting to see a conspiracy despite the evidence, when you are evidently the one who really wants to see a conspiracy despite the evidence. When people give you detailed, backed-up rebuttals, you pithily state that it was a lame reply, when this pithy statement is in itself a lame reply. You accuse everybody else of engaging in sophistry, when sophistry is the only tactic you yourself employ. Paranoid delusionist. You have claimed a conspiracy surrounding a paper exists, when there is evidently no conspiracy, and have latched on to the most tenuous evidence you can, all of which has been successfully refuted, showing that you are desperate to find a conspiracy where one doesn't exist. People who actively look for conspiracies where they don't exist in this way are paranoid delusionists, Malcolm. Petulant child. You refuse to answer pertinent points and questions for no reason whatsoever, and yet seem to happily latch on to people not always answering every point you raise as if it's a sign of your victory. You outright ignored points that you were incapable of answering in an attempt to pretend they'd never been raised. And again, your only reply to people who provided you with detailed, backed-up rebuttals is that these are lame replies, yet you refuse to demonstrate why they are wrong. And, again, when faced with criticism you can't handle, your only option has been censorship, either by using the lame excuse of somebody's colourful vernacular, or by closing down the comments section to one of your videos that generated appropriate critique, and then trying to pretend that you weren't aware that the comments had been disabled. These are just a few examples of why these labels are appropriate for you, Malcolm. Anybody willing to read your comments or watch your videos will find many more. I actually can't think of a better set of 5 words to describe you without using expletives. As I've said before, I've been as respectful and polite as I should be expected to be to a senior member of our society. However, your behaviour has been constantly childish, and I had stated quite reasonably that if you continue to act like a child, I would treat you like a child. Malcolm, there's a phrase that I think should be printed on t-shirts and billboards around the world, and that you'd do well to remember. Intellectual integrity. It's a virtue, not an obstacle. So I'm going to end this video with the same tactic that you used when you ended your reply to CoolHardLogic, by suggesting a change to your nom de plume. I had thought of going from Malcolm Bowden to Mellifluous Balderdash, but that'll just confuse the younger audience. Maybe mystifying baloney? But I don't think that conveys it well enough. In fact, I've spent my entire time talking to you, Malcolm, making sure I never use expletives, but in conversing with you, I think the only person who could possibly fail to understand why people do use expletives when talking to someone so infuriatingly immature for their supposed age of wisdom is you. As such, I'm going to use the expletive of choice of your chosen adversary here, and suggest you would be better retitled Mendacious Bollocks. Oh, and by the way, Malcolm, that's how you go about debunking someone's claims. You go through them systematically and actually debunk them. Well, there we go. I'll leave the appropriate links in the video description, along with links to CoolHardLogic's Testing Geocentricity series and Andromedaswake's video, and also the video Creationists and the Speed of Light. I encourage everyone to check out CoolHardLogic if you haven't already. His videos are entertaining and very informative, unlike Malcolm Bowden's in every respect. I'm not sure what Andromedaswake is up to these days, but his presence is well missed for now. If you haven't checked his stuff out, you really need to. I also recommend Killian's Bugosity series. He's the guy that made the Creationists and the Speed of Light video. So, to everyone who's stuck with it to the end of this marathon video, well done, and thanks for watching.